today we will focus on the thing which Anya told you, that if where the starting point of innovation, is it in the fundamental science, or vice versa, the technology asks innovators to think how to proceed with some practical ideas. In principle, there are different models of innovations. Earlier there was idea that only from fundamental science, then practical issues, mission-oriented things, and later technology. And nowadays we see that from our even everyday life and from some more practical issues, or for example NASA things, there emerge some problems where the innovators have to show their smartness in order to give us the view and the way to the future. So I want to start with asking our speakers about their opinion on the starting point for innovation. Is it from the fundamental science, or is it more mission-oriented from some practical issues? So,
since I have the microphone, I will start. Oh yeah, you have your
they snuck one in. I've got one here. But go ahead, sir.
Thank you. So, for people who have not heard my presentation yesterday, I'm Юрієм Гогоці. I'm a professor at Drexel University and directing Nanotechnology Institute there. And since we are working in the university environment, we do all kind of scientific research, from very fundamental to applied. But in my group, primarily, we start with the fundamental science. In most cases, we really discover new materials, new mechanisms, and then we right away start thinking where and how this can be applied. For example, just today we published a paper on using our new materials, MXENCE, for brain electrodes, outperforming gold electrodes to improve accuracy of measuring brain signals. And in 10 days, on the 21st, well, less than 10 days, within a week, on the 21st of September, we'll have a paper coming on use of MXENCE in antennas, making transparent antennas RFID tags here. So this is a way probably 80% of work is done. Then we patent our work, then we start looking for companies interested in licensing, or we eventually launch some small businesses, spin-off companies from the university. However, another maybe 20% of work, what we do is when a company comes to us, or it may not necessarily be a company, it can be a federal agency like NASA or Department of Defense or Department of Energy, asking a question and telling her, can you do this and that? And we start thinking, sometimes we say, no, sorry, we have no idea how to solve your problem. Sometimes we do, and we tell, let's work together. We may find a solution for your problem here. And I guess at NASA it may be somewhat different. What do you say?
Actually, it's not too terribly different. So the way NASA is developed, we have 10 different NASA centers. Some of them are operations centers, like Johnson Space Center, Kennedy Space Center, and Marshall Space Flight Center. They deal, when I say operations, they're dealing with spacecraft in orbit, people on those. So they're primarily dealing with applied sort of problems. You know, there's something that we need, that is needed, and so they're looking for a technology that, if you look at the technology readiness, that's very close to being ready. It could be made in, do you guys understand technology readiness level, TRLs? You can Google that, but one being something that is very basic idea, and a 9 being that you're ready to plug it in and use it. So we're looking for something towards the 6 to 9 range in terms of the technology readiness. So not a lot of development, and we can plug it right into a spacecraft. Now those are the ops centers. We also have research centers. That's where it's very much where they're either working on basic science. Now, it eventually ends up being applied somewhere, but they may bring the technology just from a 1 or 2 or 3 to the mid-range. And so they're working on very basic sorts of science, asking fundamental questions, trying to learn things. And then, of course, when they get one of these ideas, NASA, you know, one hand of NASA is dealing with the other hand. And so the the research centers may take it through the mid-range, and then the operations centers will pick that up and bring it across the finish line so that it can be used in space on a real space vehicle. So we've got this good cross communication on how that works, but the ecosystem is even larger than that. We use universities just like Drexel, as you suggest, where often we're doing grants, we're bringing questions out, we deal with all of our academic partners, so that's one other mechanism by which we do this. We also have a lot of U.S. companies that deal with NASA, and so if we have a problem, we put out either calls within the NASA companies, or we'll put out a broad area announcement that says, hey, NASA has this thing we need to study, this thing we need to, if we need to land, say, small landers on the moon, we're looking for companies to propose innovative ideas on how to do that. So our model's kind of growing and changing as we go on, and we're pulling in innovation from different fields.
And actually, it can be both. Just last week, we got a grant from NASA, but via a small company. It's so-called Small Business Innovative Research Program, where a small company received funding from NASA to develop a new type of a battery. But they need new materials for this battery, so they give some money to us, to the university, that we can help them develop these materials. So you get NASA, you get a small company like many of you may be involved with, and you have a major university working together to solve a problem.
So starting from this point, it's an interesting question if the government should give funding for the innovation or business, because in different countries we have different experience. For example, in Israel, we have more than half of money in all the R&D system from business. Of course, it means that government creates the conditions where the business is not only wants to innovate, but really can do this. And the majority of different instruments, with proper regulations, codes, proper system of IP, and so on. So, but for example, in USA, as far as I understand, the government is ambitious enough to provide a lot of majority, I think, of funding to innovation. So who should give more, government or companies? Because the basic science is like a public good, and the innovations, it depends. Sometimes it's private good, sometimes it's public good. When it's for NASA, for example, yeah. So who?
Well, in a lot of these cases, if the basic science isn't being done, by a university or by another entity, in the U.S. at least, it's the job of the government to kind of spur that and learn these fundamental questions. And we may do grants with universities to help them start studying certain areas if they're not working on it, or we work on it ourselves. But then there's other areas where business has taken upon the mantle of running that. Pharmaceutical is a big one. That's not anything the government is necessarily directly involved with unless there are some specific things. Much of the pharmaceutical research is funded by companies and businesses and universities, depending on things. But so it's important for the government to work on the things that aren't being done in business, but also set up an ecosystem such that those things can rise to the top.
And my feeling is, particularly for Ukraine, it's possible and necessary expect more from the government, because there is no major high-tech industry, I think, capable of funding innovation at the moment. And second, also, there is no culture of this funding that has been created, developed in the United States, in Israel, a number of other countries. And probably a better example for Ukraine to follow would be examples of countries which kind of a smaller economies. For example, let me give you an example of Norway, where I spent 2 years in the distant past as a postdoctoral fellow. Norway is a rich country because of oil, and they get 100% of electricity from hydropower stations. So basically almost like a free electricity. So what they do? They don't fund everything. They fund science and technology, which is related to their industry. They find a lot of petrochemical industry, applied research, fundamental research in the field, electrometallurgy, because this gives them edge over other countries. So similar way, Ukraine could select sectors where Ukraine has strengths. It may be actually aviation because of Antonov planes, and invest into research there. It can be, for example, making metals. Titanium, Ukraine is #7 in the world, I think, in resources of titanium. And this is a high value added metal that can be produced also not in just a metal selling or metal ore, but selling really products made of it here. So my personal feeling, this would be the right way for Ukrainian government to create a new industry. And then when this industry is ripe and understands needs and needs outsource smaller projects, development of particular products, the industry will go and support smaller companies which will do this work here. But before that, I don't have a feeling that Ukrainian industry will able to nurture smaller company and fund innovations well enough.
Yeah, but the problem in Ukraine is that except strong human capital, we have almost nothing to start with, because the state capacity is very low. It means that the priority setting in Ukraine was always about not proper analysis, not thinking about future or goal setting, but rather about one people lobbying their business interests. So every time when in Ukraine we are talking about let us set the priorities, we understand that it will be not the priority for all, but the priority, for selected. That's so on the one hand. On the other hand, it's important, yes, to get scientific expertise, to get some broader vision, to get some forecasting, to understand where we are strong, and to set these priorities and to give funds for that. But it's a tricky question, because of the things. For example, we have the law on priorities in science for Ukraine, and one of them, 7, I guess, of them are more or less about energy, safety, and something like that, and one of these fundamental research. So it was formulated rather broadly because of the fear that we will prioritize, not because of the understanding where we are strong. The other thing in Ukraine, I think that as governmental funding always will be very, very restricted, not always, but for the several decades, I think. My opinion for science, for technology, for innovations, and for many, many other spheres of life is that the government should, as it has big capacity, should give as more free space for people who are ready, smart enough, and want to start something as it possible. Because I think that waiting for this priority setting process, waiting for some funding, it will be very restricted funding. There will be such regulations. You told that government or NASA gave money to some company, and that company can give money for you to do something. In Ukraine, it's impossible, because our regulations, when the money are from government, they will be always from government, and the regulation and all the stuff around that, so people will say no at the second stage. It will be no the third stage, as in your case. So regulating many things, creating that ecosystem conditions will help people who want to start something, to start it in Ukraine, not to go somewhere because of many clever reasons, but to start here. And then younger generations, so students, we were talking about the dramatic brain drain without brain circulation. Many people will see that here, if they are smart, they will have the possibility in this economy to try themselves. And then maybe we will have some stories of success. So I guess it should be a parallel process, and then when we are talking with the government, we're trying to ask these questions. And now this year, 2018, is very active in this sense, because we had the parliamentary hearings on the national innovating ecosystem, and there are some recommendations yet not, I think, made a law, but they are in the final stage. And also the Ministry of Education and Science during all the summer was working with the people from science, from technology, from different people, was working on the strategy of innovative development of Ukraine. And also this year there was established a new body. I told yesterday that last year we created National Board on Science and Technology Development, and this year they created the National Board on Innovations, where there are people in the National Board on Science and Technology. There is half of scientists who will provide the support to government. And in Board on Innovation, there is a majority of people who are from innovative business, who have from IT, biotechnology, and so on in Ukraine, who have the proper experience and are ready to talk to government what are the problems. And in principle, there is some political dedication, intention, maybe, to do something in this way. So we are here in the point when it starts to be interest for politicians and is discussing and so on. But there is one problem, that many of our politicians think about innovation as something about, like, you know, which is not about science, not about great money, but something, there is one, I don't know, smart student sitting on his backyard trying to do something, tick, 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 and he obtains something revolutionary. They do not understand all the things, great things we're talking about. So when they talk about innovations, they are thinking about not big money, not serious problems, not ecosystem at all. So there is a risk of balancing the things, you know, the innovation driven by serious, basic and applied research, and some innovation which is social innovation.
You know, there are certain things that are difficult to change. Many governments have problems. Our president has not had a science advisor for almost 2 years. But the system is still working, less depending on the central government, I guess, in the US. You mentioned one important thing, Yulia, that Ukraine has human capital. And while there may not necessarily be developed the industrial system ready to support innovation, ready to support younger people working on science innovation product here. There are companies elsewhere. Similarly, give an example here. About, well, actually more than half of my research is currently supported by foreign sources. Many of them are companies, major, for example, Japanese or European companies that pay for research that we do, that license technologies that we developed in the US. And this is where young entrepreneur in Ukraine should not be shy to look beyond Ukraine, look for opportunities elsewhere. Companies around the world have interest to new biosensors, or new software, or something else. I have a friend in the US who actually has a branch of his software company in Ukraine, exactly because there is human capital here, because there are people who help him develop software. He has a branch in Ireland, he has a branch in Ukraine. And he uses knowledge of Ukrainian programmers. Similar way, there can be companies develop intellectual property in Ukraine and offering it to companies in the US, in Japan, in Singapore, elsewhere. So I think this is something that is, again, important to do, and I think there is a legal base for this, and Ukrainian companies can engage in this type of activity. It's just much less common. I think people often simply, I guess, don't know how to start, where to start. But you should just be aware of there are opportunities like that, and companies like Toyota, Honda, BASF, they support research worldwide. They scout for new technologies, innovations worldwide. And I think it's important to Ukraine to bring Ukrainian ideas, Ukrainian innovation to attention of this international business is one way of doing it. It's actually publishing work for scientists in international journals where it can capture attention. It's publicizing online, but I think this is another opportunity that is being underused by Ukrainian researchers and innovators.
As an example for how we create an ecosystem, and this has to be long term. It's not something that can change yearly or whatever. NASA, in its Science Mission Directorate, so that's the directorate that's looking, it's planetary, it's earth science, all those sorts of things, answering the big questions. What they do every decade, they do with the National Academies of Science, so that's an external organization that's not biased. And so you're not going to have stakeholders trying to control the conversation. They do a decadal survey. They survey all kinds of scientists across the U.S. What are the big questions that NASA ought to go build missions and build capabilities to go figure out? And that is the decadal survey. And then over the next decade, NASA determines what is our strategy by which we're going to go and try and answer these questions, visit these destinations, observe these things on the Earth to improve our understanding. And then that's where we develop, we figure out what universities we want to collaborate with, what other countries, what companies. So it all flows from that. That's just a model that we use that could potentially something similar like that, where you have an independent body instead of you having a lot of independent stakeholders. You have someone that's more broad, help you set that tone.
Also, just to clarify, in the United States, Academy of Sciences is a professional society and community. Academy of Sciences doesn't have really budget to distribute, doesn't have a network of institutions, so that's why this is an unbiased organization.
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
Like in Ukraine.
Yeah, because here Academy of Science is something else. So, and what about you said that scientific system is not very centralized under government in principle, but yesterday we discussed this issue and it's very important for Ukraine, the duration of the cycle for science. All science, fundamental, applied, technology, and the policy cycles when governments change, when priorities can change also. And for example, as in Ukraine, the war started, and so we have to provide more funding for these issues and so on. So what about this also always problem, the current priorities of the government and the priorities of the science are in USA. It's a very relevant question, and what to do in Ukraine where policy cycle is not 5 or 10 years but 2 years, and here the policy change really real.
Well, similar things to a certain extent happen in Ukraine, in the US. For example, in the time of President Obama administration, electrical energy storage usage became a high priority. But before that, hydrogen was a very popular topic of research. Hydrogen economy was expected to become a dominating factor. Obama administration came and almost like a cut-off funding for hydrogen economy, electrical came. New administration is now, I think, pays less attention to science in general, but again, pushing more towards usage of coal and oil and gas and so on. So these changes happen depending on president and new administration coming. However, there are still long-term priorities. And whatever you say, if you want to have fundamental science supported, this is where the government should play a role. Because industry by its nature cannot support, at least not nowadays, 15, 20 years long research. So science and infrastructure, there are two things that only government can probably do in any countries. And this is what people who vote, people who can go on the streets and demonstrate should demand from the government.
Yes, and here is interesting that long-term ambition is very important in order to provide some sustainability in this process. So I will ask you some maybe provocative question, but it's very interesting for me, and maybe it will be used by me. So if you will be the foreign advisor of our Prime Minister, or maybe President, but Prime Minister is better, I think, about Ukrainian innovation system. So they will ask you, both will ask you about what to do with Ukraine, what the best practice of USA, of NASA, or Drexel University should help us in order to understand the place of innovation for Ukrainian economy or for our ambition setting, something like that.
Ukraine has a fantastic amount of human capital. That, I think, would be the main thing you want to try and employ and drive towards some common goal. One of the things that we have at NASA, all the folks that worked on Apollo are retired, they're gone, and we have a lot of young people coming in. Okay, so probably a lot of folks that are about the same age as most of the audience here. How do we get the young people to understand innovation and how to understand to develop hardware, flight hardware? So yeah, we may take some of the big projects and give them to universities or companies, but we always try to have some amount of smaller level projects that we can have the new younger employees work on with some of the older employees, so that you need to get your hands dirty. You need to try and you need to fail and then try again. I mean, there has to be this cycle of learning quickly and a feedback loop. So I would hope that that sort of capability, would come here to Ukraine, where there's even some smaller concepts and projects that get younger people paired with some of the older people, but give them the hands-on work so they can learn the innovation and learn how to actually do it.
I would also suggest to the Ukrainian government to open the country to international high-tech business. There are many opportunities here. You can see all major international corporations have research centers now in India or in China. But this gives opportunity after that, these companies to build also enterprises, plants here, which will give jobs to, again, qualified people in Ukraine. And this is an opportunity to basically support research and it's show to government that it is profitable for the country, that it will bring direct dividends. And I think this is again where steps need to be made by the government, bringing IP system, for example, in order that companies will not be afraid to develop something in Ukraine. Bringing tax system in order that again companies that do high-tech business, research and development get some tax relief. And this will bring companies, this will bring innovations to Ukraine and help to build, I think, innovation environment here.
Yeah, it's a great problem that, so the problems of science, technology and innovation are the part of the greater problem of Ukrainian political stability, economical stability, business climate we are talking about. So this is like a closed circle when we do not know where to start about. So there is some political intention of governments. They say we are interested in international investors. We are trying to do our best to Ukraine to perform better in indices like doing business index and so on. So there is some ambitious goal. But really, when we are looking on the actions, the people whom I heard, there was different meetings where the people who had startups in Ukraine and later moved them to some other countries or initially started them somewhere but are Ukrainians in origin, they were talking about the problems and they clearly defined all the things you're talking about. They said, I'm not safe here. Starting from the IP protection and ending just with the situation when you're performing your business and someone comes to you and say, what is you are doing here, let us look at it, and your company stops to do anything because everything is closed and something like that. And they talking about these problems, you see that then when the court is not working here, that you can't protect you, and so on. And when they, even the Ukrainians who wants to do something here, they are afraid of. For the international investor, all this picture is as awful as it makes impossible even thinking about it. So when we scientists looking on these all problems, trying to say that it's possible to make science like a profit for the country at all, but you should do some greater things in order to make this circle running. They say, yeah, it's a good idea, but. And then politics is politics. So science itself can't solve this problem, you know?
I agree. Overcoming corruption in Ukraine, creating proper legal system is very, very important for international business and innovation to come. Yeah. However, let me also tell you, there is also a simple thing like promoting and advertising opportunities. What we hear from the news in the United States about Ukraine, it's a primarily war with Russia, conflicts about Crimea and Donetsk. We don't hear about a great number of institutions of higher education, university, about science and technology in Ukraine. And as we say, no publicity, no prosperity. So I think this is again something that government should probably do, promote the good things available in Ukraine, and maybe someone will pay attention in the West.
Yeah, I think, for example, NASA and university has their own budgets for promoting what they do.
We do.
For promotion of science popularization, for all the things. So not only government is thinking directly about this, but they give you money to do all this stuff. Yeah.
we refer to it as educational outreach or STEM engagement, where we're engaging folks in terms of trying to inspire people to go into STEM careers to keep the circle going.
Because if younger people stop believing in the possibility to do something in the technical STEM field, what we need, science, technology fields, and stop going to universities, stop studying science and engineering, this will just cut off the future for the country. Ukraine cannot become a rich country using agriculture or tourism. It's too big for it, and experience of all other countries shows that in the modern world, only technologically developed countries can be prosperous. And
wealth is created through development of technology. It can go from nothing to all of a sudden, you've seen it just here today, Google, other things. There was nothing before, and these companies created wealth because of ideas, because of innovation.
Yeah. And keeping younger people studying engineering, studying sciences, working in the field is important, but for this they also need to see the future. They need to see jobs in the field. They need to see opportunities. Otherwise, they will not do it.
So today, the people who understand this and work on this are only scientists. So we have no budgets for promoting science, for any support of popularization of science, of working with pupils or students. But we are trying, yesterday I told about this, we are trying to do something. So we are trying as volunteers to make something like popularization scientific events, going to children, going to schools, going to universities and showing all this stuff, talking to their parents in order for them to understand that not only the career in service is the best thing, but also there are STEM specialties and so on. Trying to say to the government, so we are here, we are, so it's one problem is to be visible on the international level, and those of us who are working on natural sciences, mathematics, and so on, who have publications in international journals, it's okay. There are problems with Ukrainian humanities, but it's another story. But there is a problem for us of visibility inside the country, to be visible for government. It's non-trivial in Ukraine, and to be visible to society. So with society, we are working without budgets, but we are trying in order for them to say, oh, science exists in Ukraine, and oh, it's a good idea for science to exist in Ukraine, because we are talking here about the knowledge-based economy, about the economic growth based on technology. So we're trying to say people that in order they to say the government to vote sometime, but really we have no I don't know, people who include in their political programs science in some serious level. So, of course, there is some chapter science, but it's like, it's a draft on several sentences. So even if our people will be so smart to understand this chain, simply there is no politician ready to do this.
You just mentioned that Ukraine has this new Ministry of Education and Science. So I think this ministry is uniquely positioned to bring science and education together.
Yeah, in principle. So do we have questions after this fruitful discussion?
I propose to ask now 3 questions, and then it's coffee break, so we can talk after. So 3 questions from the audience.
Ask in Russian or Ukrainian if you are shy to use English.
Maybe we will ask you, do you believe that Ukraine can become a country like USA or Israel in the sense, so innovative-driven country, technology-based? Do you believe? So let us vote. Who believes that it's possible in several decades? Okay, maybe we should ask at the beginning in order to to perform experiment. But
I think there is a question over there.
But it's optimistic.
Thank you. I have a question. You said that Drexel University was organized by Drexel and Rockefeller and JP Morgan and Carnegie, yeah? And that's why maybe economy first and then science. I mean, maybe we should wait in Ukraine to appear Rockefeller or Carnegie or someone, and then wait for them to develop science. I mean, that's a natural way, but I don't know. What do you think about it?
Ukraine has its Drexels and Rockefellers. There are super rich people in Ukraine. And it's important that those people, and maybe again, this is where science community can also go and target them and convince them that it's important to invest into science education. Drexel created Drexel University because he believed that it's important to give technical education to people. There was a University of Pennsylvania just across the street from Drexel, where share a campus largely, but he wanted to make an applied university, give basically technical engineering training, because he felt that this growing industry that he was funding would need technical personnel. In very similar way, I hope that people who have a lot of money in Ukraine, who successfully denationalized, privatized Soviet industry, largely into their own pockets, or built wealth in any other ways, can also find a way to invest it, make their names known decades and centuries after. So this may also be a stimulus to build universities or build scientific enterprises that will bear their name, and they will make them actually also famous.
Really wanted to take their money. They had enough money as it was. They wanted to take their money and do something for the greater good. You had folks like Leland Stanford found Stanford University, Rice University, yeah, all kinds of the top universities in the United States. Many of them were founded by these folks who became incredibly wealthy 100 years ago and wanted to give back to the country and the community and make things better for the future. Carnegie founded a lot of libraries all around the United States.
So what about a Pinchuk University, Poroshenko University?
We are waiting.
I think over there a question.
Yeah. Hello. So I have a question about how we, as common citizens and maybe future scientists, can influence our government to make our way to innovations.
At first, I guess the proper way is to support activities of scientists, because we are trying to do a lot in order to push our government in proper way. And when we are trying to make some meetings, some new laws, some activities, we ask people from the society to support us in Facebook, coming to these meetings and so on, just to show that there are not only for example, 100 scientists who are interested in this, but the broader support is the first thing. The other thing is so to be interested in this, to read the papers, and then the journalists are becoming more interested in science because they see that it's interesting for scientists. Then to visit our popularization of science events in order to us to get acquainted, to see one another. It will motivate scientists to do all this, and it will motivate you to try to go to science or to make something like that. And the third one, of course, push out politicians to create the science. So we have all together to make science a part of political agenda. So every candidate in Ukrainian presidential election should write down a normal chapter about science with the vision and science and technology innovation, with the vision about what he or she will do in this direction.
And you need to ask these questions. You just basically ask questions. What is your agenda regarding science, regarding innovation? And at least they will take a note that they need to say something about it.
They will ask they will first try to find scientific advisors. They will ask them what they should say. They become thinking about this, and it will create some movement around this. So really, only the society can change things. So we scientists can only initiate and support this movement in two directions, it's society and government, but only you can create the collective action on them.
Thank you very much for this.
The question also behind you.
This is the fourth question, but I will give you a microphone.
I have not a question but a comment, but I'm afraid that our presidential candidates, other candidates have their own view of science, is that to stop financing whatsoever, say that science should bring money by itself from develop electricity from the air. Many of our presidential candidates love pseudoscience and fast for 3 kopecks. Electricity should cost 3 kopecks and be obtained from the air, and all these results could be obtained by school children from minor Academy of Sciences, and that's all. So this is a very dangerous way. I am sometimes more confident if they are silent about science.
I think we are here in the point where the visibility of this process will create the opportunity, because we are also always, so Ukrainian history is not so normal, maybe normal, but not so easy, but we are also always afraid of trying to change something because it can become worse. But I think that in principle, in 2018, there are a lot of people, young people, not very young people, but who are aware of the fact that we can even try. So we have to make this process visible, to include society in this dialogue, and to try. I do not think that today the worst scenario is very realistic, but I think that the discussion, open discussion, will bring our chances more higher.
And I think, look at the countries like Korea, like Singapore, which have never had any history of technology or research, which were basically poor agrarian countries or dangerous place for sailors just a few decades ago. In several decades, they became countries which are at the forefront of science and innovation. We all use Korean cell phones, and we know that Korea, which was one of the poorest countries in the region, always behind Japan and China, where it is right now here. I think those are examples to follow, but it's necessary that people like yourself believe into these opportunities and work to change the country.
Thank you.